Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Ronnie Feldman for another episode of the award-winning Creativity and Compliance. Welcome back, Ronnie.
Hey, good to be here. Hello, everybody out there in the world. Good to speak with you today.
So, Ronnie, the one of the things that we have talked about literally the entire history of this podcast is, do you evidence that you've done training, or do you worry about the effectiveness of engagement? And are those mutually exclusive, or can we somehow meld them together to perhaps demonstrate to regulators, yes, we have performed our minimum requirement, but beyond that, we have induced engagement with our employees?
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I have a big peeve with the fact that most companies and most training vendors, quite frankly, focus, I don't want to say too much, they focus on the measurement factor, the evidence and measurement factor, to the exclusion of the engagement factor. And I think if you're leaning one way or the other, you got to lean towards making sure things are engaging and effective and interesting and nourish your audience. I just came off a call a few minutes ago with a new prospect who was, they started the request by going, we got to make sure that everything is measured, and then we have these knowledge checks, and we want this minimum amount of time and this maximum amount of time. And it occurs to me that we're focusing, it's a very defensive posture. What they're saying is, when things go bad, which big companies, a certain percentage of bad things are going to happen, but when things go bad, we'll be able to show that we did something. It's a complete CYA mentality. We're going to go to the thing that's easiest to measure, annual training that checks their knowledge, and we're going to push it out, and we're going to chase them down until we get a 100% completion rate. It's completely defensive, and more often than not, if that's your focus, it's going to be terrible, which I think undermines your ability to actually influence behaviors and mitigate risks, i.e., educate and change behaviors for your employees so that they don't get into trouble and so they understand the rules. I think it makes infinitely more sense to focus on how do I engage employees and how do I create a program that gives us the max amount of influence and impact on employees so that we have a greater likelihood of mitigating risk, and then measure those things, right? We got to think about how to measure the things that actually influence behaviors, not figure out what can measure and then back into engagement. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've worked next to, along with, against a lot of training vendors, and it's much simpler for them to to create something that you can measure that sucks, right? And that's what they promote. They're like, we've got all the risk areas, we've got the knowledge check, we can measure it. And it's inherently bad in the way it's constructed. So it drives me batty. So with that as the preamble, let me get your reactions, and then we could talk about things that you can do that have a more impact on the company, and talk about the ways we can measure those. But what's your thoughts about that sort of engagement?
Actually, you used a phrase I've never heard you use before, and I really want to explore it because it really struck me, and that was nourish your audience. You didn't say engage with your audience. You didn't say teach your audience. You didn't say bring this or that to the audience. You used the word nourish. And I really wanted to maybe ask you how compliance can nourish an audience as opposed to some of the other adverbs or even adjectives you might consider.
Yeah, like, it is a fun phrase that we've been messing around with a little bit, partially because we did a podcast on it last year. It was about the idea that you have all the ingredients for your program, right? You have training. It's inherently tasteless and bland and serves no nutritional value. So I started to play around with this idea because it makes total sense. Like, you want employees to come away going, yeah, right. We're not the kind of company that bribes and is corrupt and has conflicts. Like, we don't steal and cheat. So they believe that. We need to share that we need to bolster that by giving them something that nourishes that sensibility. And so that means that the things that we give them have to be short and snackable and have some value to them, versus what I would argue our training is, which is empty calories. You fed yourself, but you don't feel good afterwards. And you certainly don't, if you had a choice, wouldn't go back to that restaurant, right? So when I think about what we should do from an engagement perspective and a measurement perspective is more comms and awareness all year round that both reminds people about the importance of doing the right thing, reminds them of the speak up reporting options that are available, reminds them of where to find policies and learning resale sources and tips and tools, that reminds people that ethics compliance are helpful advisors and coaches, all of those things. Integrate and spread those out as often as possible. I would tell you that it's helpful that those are entertaining because you can play them in higher rotation and put them in more places. And then measuring click-through rates and access to policies. So set a baseline. How many people have accessed your code of conduct? How many people have accessed your new Gen AI policy? Whatever. And then start driving traffic there using these short communications, which again could be memes, they could be videos, they got to be short little nuggets. You get the hit for the messaging, the dopamine hit on something short and fun, and then also the double hit where you're driving them to the resource and you're measuring those click-through rates and those access to policies. So that's an idea of high engagement with a measurement factor. I would say more targeted training than the one that goes out to everybody. If you feel the need for money, time, that you got to push it out to everybody, do that as simply, as quickly as possible and measure that and spend your money on things that actually help people. So short, relevant training that's reinforced. And then your measurement, in addition to people completing it, which it will be higher if it's shorter and more targeted and has some entertainment value. But the quiz question, the knowledge check should occur later, not right after you just told them the thing. This is what a conflict of interest is. These are 3 examples. Here's a quiz. Can you define a conflict of interest? Are these examples? And they're like, yes, while they're folding their laundry, right? So if you actually want to measure knowledge, you got to do that survey question later in the year. So again, that's about behaviors. You're trying to actually get people to learn something. These are things that help people learn something. You're just measurements occurring later. And then there's other things you can do. Give content to leaders and have them disseminate it on their own. Now, if you're doing that live or through a Zoom or a Teams, again, a little bit harder to measure than an LMS, learning management, something that tracks to a person, but you can have those leaders certify that they did it. These are all valid measurement tools. They're slightly less precise, but that doesn't mean they're less effective. Actually, they're more effective because, again, these things have higher engagement value that are more at a local level. And in the previous iterations of those compliance reports that come out from the DOJ from time to time, all those reports, they always say informal training and communication does count. More targeted training is good. Communications and awareness is extremely important. And informal measurements of those things, these measurements of those informal things does count. So let's do those things because they're more effective.
Is there a chance or possibility, or do we even need to be concerned about compliance fatigue?
Oh, yeah. One of the most common things I hear is that, gosh, we're putting old wine in new bottles. We did this. If you really step back and think of it, you have these companies who say, yeah, this course is 4 years old, so we need to refresh it. In my head, I'm like, you've been doing the same course for 3 years in a row? Like it was old after the first time. So yeah, you got to be worried about it. So if the point is we're trying to build an effective program that keeps your company out of trouble, and better yet, make sure that we're acting ethically, which show in a more ethical companies make more money and tend to have higher engagement levels and better customer service and all those things. People who believe in their company, they tend to do better. So if we believe those things, then yeah, we got to be interesting, engaging to nourish our audience around these things. The other idea I guess I'll end with is that if I'm thinking about the things that will show that we're an ethical company, again, it's less about understanding that I know all the HIPAA laws and I know what the FCPA is about. It's more, am I aware of the Speak Up reporting resources? How many people are aware of that? If I come across bad behavior, will I speak up? Measure that over time. If I do speak up, or if someone does speak up and we find that there's wrongdoing, is there a sense that it'll be followed up on and that there will be consequences for those actions? i.e., is there a sense of organizational justice? These are the things that you measure. And if you measure those over time and start doing these shorter, more frequent, more positive communications and burst learnings, those statistics will improve over time. If you're just doing that annual training, they will not. They'll be low and they'll stay low. So engagement and evidence need to work in tandem, but from engagement to measurement, not from measurement to engagement.
So if we take that approach, engagement to measurement, could you sit down, or could a compliance officer or compliance team sit down and try to map out 1 year of this? Or is that just too big? You might bite size it to a quarter or a half a year so that you can incorporate kind of current events or some other topics that might pop up. How would you help a compliance officer think through mapping this type of program out, Ronnie?
Yeah, it's a great question. From practical purposes, you want to do an annual training if you can. So yeah, a training and communications roadmap, preferably one that takes into account other training and communications that are happening throughout the organization that are non-ethics compliance related, is super helpful. But so yeah, like mapping out a training calendar and a communications calendar that supplements and supports that. Is that those who listen to this podcast know I'm a big fan of train less, communicate more. So there certainly should be a monthly touch point. So again, that could be the email, the newsletter, the leader-led video that they're playing. Some monthly touch point can be real light. Hopefully it has some entertainment value, because then you're teaching the audience that if they click on that thing, it will not take up a lot of their time and it will be rewarding, nourishing, right? So a little snack. By doing that over time, you'll increase your audience and you'll increase the access to those policies, and you'll increase your trust in organizational justice and knowledge of speak up reporting resources and policies. So yeah, that. And then being more intentional about when those trainings occur and keeping those things to 10 minutes or less if you can. I'm a big fan of having those ingrained in the flow of business, meaning packaging those things and giving them to leaders and getting them to deliver them. So I think that's pretty valuable. And then adjusting along the way. Like you can have your calendar about, hey, we want to talk about records management this month and highlight privacy in this month and highlight speak up in this month. And you can kind of be intentional about that. But as we talked about on the Tyson Avery podcast from Lucid Motors, he says, you got to break it personal. You got to pull from the news. You got to pull from life and find a way to make it relevant to them. And that could be from your life or from what's happening out in the world. Just needs a little bit of a framing. There's some corruption that happens in the news, so you talk about your corruption policy. There's some privacy breach in the news. There's some sporting event where someone gets caught cheating and you talk about those things, or something personal in your life. I'm at my kid's soccer game and this parent is yelling and screaming at their kid, and then you talk about respect or whatever it is. Pulling from those things is always helpful. So to summarize that, yes, calendar, if you can do it. It's not, I don't want to say it's easy, but it is just be intentional about your calendar. And so you can see those touch points, which is a great piece of evidence to share with the regulators should something go bad, to show that map. And then with the ability to adjust and be flexible along the way. Yeah, we're all improvisers in the world, right? You got to adjust and improvise based on what's happening in the world around you. And then, and then measure those things. Do things that are engaging and regular, and then measure those things.
It seems like a great way for us to end this podcast. You want to tell everybody bye-bye, Ronnie?
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for listening to Ronnie's ramblings today. We appreciate you. Be fun and interesting, and measure those things.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day, one actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network, available wherever you listen to podcasts.